That borehole is lined with steel. It's got cement between the steel casing and the rock. And at a mile deep, we've got about 1 billion tons of rock over the disposal facility. And so it is really safe. When you look at the safety stats, the peak dose comes about 1.6 million years into the future. And it's the equivalent of eating about a banana a year.
All right, welcome back inside our proactive newsroom. And joining me now is Rod Baltzer. He is the CEO of Deep Isolation Nuclear. And Rod, it's great to see you. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Steve, for having me on.
Yeah, excited to have you on. Excited to learn a bit more about the company. I know you're a very interesting, fascinating company, and you've had some recent news out we'll talk about. Lots to talk about. But first, let's give everyone a little bit of an overview of the company.
Sure. So Deep Isolation Nuclear has technology to use directional drilling out of the oil and gas industry, combine that with nuclear waste handling to take the spent fuel out of reactors and dispose of it a mile deep in boreholes. So it's safe, isolated for 1 million years, and something that can be modular. You don't necessarily have to transport the waste. It can be done at the site of generation.
Yeah, and so how did this all happen? How did you come up with this concept of doing this and using the holes to try and get rid of this nuclear waste?
Yeah, our co-founders were looking at, is global warming real? If so, what do you do about it? And kept coming back to nuclear and thinking, well, gosh, people kind of hate it. And part of that is the nuclear waste. And what do you do with it? Nobody's ever disposed of it anywhere in the world. And so they started looking at, the traditional technology of a mined repository, which is huge and cumbersome and takes a long time. And then comparing that to oil and gas and what they do in directional drilling, and thought, this looks like the right size. I think we can do this better.
Yeah. Rod, what do you say to people when they say, "Oh, you shouldn't be putting it in the ground"? Like, I'm sure you get that question all the time, and I think people may not understand how the technology works and what you do with it, and why it's so deep underground. So, can you sort of talk us through that part of it?
Yeah, back in the, gosh, I guess 50s through the 80s, there was a lot of debate of what should you do with this, and they talked about shooting it into space, but you don't really want this to explode and come back down to Earth if it doesn't isn't successful, or just dropping it into the ocean and things, and they just kept coming back that really a deep geologic repository was the way to go. And for most mined repositories, they're about a half a kilometer. We're a kilometer and a half deep when we do our horizontal, which is about a mile. And we take one spent nuclear fuel assembly, we put that into a steel canister, and then we put it in a borehole. That borehole is lined with steel. It's got cement between the steel casing and the rock. And at a mile deep, we've got about 1 billion tons of rock over the disposal facility. And so it is really safe. When you look at the safety stats, the peak dose comes about 1.6 million years into the future, and it's the equivalent of eating about a banana a year. So it's a very safe way to do it.
And the numbers back up what you're talking about two ways. First off, on patents, I know you have a lot of them. So this is really borne out in science, so to speak, of how to properly dispose of this as well. Is that accurate there, Rod?
Yeah, we were founded over 10 years ago. And so during that time, our first patent was just taking waste horizontal. And so that was patent number one. But we've got 100 now on how do you identify that site? How do you know the characteristics of that site would be sufficient? How do you design that borehole, the canister, the latching attachments, the mechanisms, the monitoring, how to plug it? So the whole life cycle of it. And that's global. We're a global company. So we do this not just in the US, but around the world.
Yeah. And I was also reading on your website that a recent survey found that over 80% of Americans, in fact, said it's really national security to find a solution for getting rid of all this waste. So it sounds like some minds are being changed, if that's the way to describe it, in how nuclear is and how it's eventually taken care of once it's done its life.
Yeah, our surveys, we've done several of these over time, and they keep coming back to, long-term storage above ground isn't what people want. They want to see it disposed of safely, and that's deep underground. And we can do that. We've got the technology. People live close to this. They don't want it traveling through their neighborhoods. They just want it disposed of where it's at would be better. And so there's lots of opportunity with our company and the boreholes and the technology to make that happen.
Okay, a couple more questions here, Rod. Last, I want to ask you about this deep borehole demonstration center that's in Texas that the company has recently talked about. Tell me a bit about this one.
Yeah, that's a nonprofit 501(c), and its goal is basically to provide a lot more public information on deep borehole disposal. So we're a member of that. We helped found that nonprofit, and then last January we kicked off with that the Deep Borehole Demonstration Center. That is a mouthful, but
Yeah.
we kicked off a full scale at depth demonstration, and so we've ordered the long lead items and expect to start drilling late this year.
All right. And lastly, just what could people expect from the company, for the rest of this year and into 2027? What are some of the key things you're working on?
Yeah, part of it is that demonstration. So we'll get those long lead items in late this year and start drilling. That'll take a couple of months to get that fully drilled. And so by mid next year, we'll be able to in place and retrieve canisters out of that wellbore. So those will be great things to keep a watch over. Other things in the industry is the Department of Energy's Nuclear Lifecycle Innovation Campus Initiative. They've got 5 states now that have looked at disposal and are interested, and we expect that gets narrowed down to 3, it sounds like, by the end of the year. So lots of things to pay attention to.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to following your story as it develops. Rod, thank you so much. Really great to catch up with you. And as I mentioned, it's an interesting company, and we'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, Rod Baltzer, the CEO of Deep Isolation Nuclear.